Greetings of the day, everyone. I'm privileged and enthralled to welcome you all into the third edition of Orange City Literature Festival, organized by SGR Knowledge Foundation in association with GH Raisoni University, powered by Raisoni Group of Institutions. I am Amay Jangde, delighted to be your anchor for today's session. Turmeric Nation, a passage through India's space. It's a book by Shylashri Shankar, and she'll be in conversation with Dr. Shakti Sharma ma'am. So, about Shylashri Shankar ma'am. She is a senior fellow at the Center for Policy Research, New Delhi. In addition to regular columns on food, books, gardening, and democracy, she has written on judicial activism in India and Sri Lanka, cross-judicial engagement of secularism in India, Sri Lanka, and South Africa, ethnic conflict in South Asia and the Middle East, and the politics and impact of anti-poverty programs. Her published books include Scaling Justice, India's Supreme Court, Anti-Terror Laws and Social Rights, and with Raghav Ghaya, Battling Corruption, as Narega reached India's rural poor. It's an honor to have you with us, ma'am. And this gets even more delightful as we have Dr. Shakti Sharma ma'am with us, who will be in conversation with her as the moderator. About Shakti Sharma ma'am. She is a renowned doctor in Nagpur. She has specializes in dietitian and has worked with several hospitals and has 15 years of relevant work experience. Dr. Shakti Sharma ma'am has been professionally active in other important ways. She has graduated with a MHSC degree from MH College of Home Science, Jabalpur. Post that, she has went on to take PhD, Food Science and Nutrition from Rani Darugavati Vidyalaya. Now, it's an honor to have you with us, Ms. Shylashri Shankar ma'am. And also, I'd like to welcome you both. Also, before moving ahead, I would like to take a moment and acknowledge the support of Speaking Tiger Communication, as their association is valuable to OCLF. Now, my dear audience, you are about to experience a conversation between two very dynamic individuals. So, without skipping a moment, I humbly invite Dr. Shakti Sharma ma'am to lead us ahead. Ma'am, please.
Thank you so much, Anay, and thank you for the beautiful introduction. I also thank you on behalf of Shylashri ma'am. Welcome, ma'am. And to start this conversation, ma'am, my first question would definitely be, what made you decide that the title of the book should be Turmeric Nation? When actually in your book, you don't talk a lot about turmeric.
Yeah. So you wanted to you're asking what made me choose my title,
Yeah,
Turmeric Nation.
title.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a very catchy title, ma'am.
Yeah, it's a very catchy title. But actually, I chose the title before the pandemic and before all this craze for turmeric began. So. And I'd actually chosen it because I was trying to look for something that united, that was sort of pan-Indian, where you could say everybody in India uses a particular spice or uses a particular dish or makes a particular dish. And I found that only turmeric was something that you could trace it all the way back to the Harappan cooking pots. And they've been doing these archaeological digs in Haryana, near Delhi and elsewhere. And what they found was that in these cooking pots from, say, about 2500 BC, they found that Harappans ate wheat, barley, millets, pulses, mango, and they cooked with ginger, garlic, yam, and turmeric. So turmeric was there, it sort of, and it was something that goes all the way back to that, to a very ancient time. The other thing was that, I thought everybody used turmeric. And then I found that there's an essay on Dalit foods in my book. And I found that the Dalits, in UP and in the 70s and 80s, what was interesting and also really sad about it was that for them, turmeric was aspirational because they couldn't really afford it. So whenever somebody came to look at, someone came to look at a girl, for instance, for a marriage, the girl's family would say, do they make haldiya dal? So do they actually cook put turmeric in dal and cook with it, and that was the indicator that the groom's family was slightly better off than the bride's family. So it was also an aspirational dish. So that was, I mean, that's the reason why I chose Turmeric Nation for the title. But I don't really talk about turmeric at all in the book. So I'm sure a lot of people are cursing me when they go and, pick up the book and they don't find a single mention of turmeric
But I feel
apart
your
from the
book is
title.
yeah. Then your book is well-researched book. And you've talked a lot about the food being affected by the region, religion, caste, economic standards. But before you started your research, what was your opinion about the Indian cuisine? How did you perceive it as?
Yeah, so as I said, I mean, I thought, we could find something, we could actually find a dish or something that would be very, which would be pan-Indian. And I thought it would actually be possible to either identify a dish or an ingredient or a cooking style that was common to all Indians. Like we associate pasta and pizza with Italy, right? I thought we could find something like that. So what I found was there was khichdi. Khichdi is sort of made in different places, right? So that's something which you could call pan-Indian, but it's sort of cooked in very different ways, in very simple ways, very complex ways. So, you have like the khichdi Gujarati, which uses garlic, onion, and cinnamon, but there's no meat. But then you have khichdi Dawood Khani, which uses meat, eggs, and spinach. So the dish itself then becomes just a bunch of things, but it tastes very different across different places. So I was quite surprised that, I couldn't actually identify a single dish or an ingredient or a cooking style that was common to all, across India. And the other thing which I also found was that, I thought I could find something Indian in this method. But what I found was actually that was the wrong way of looking about it, thinking of it. It was, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, but, just for this, for what you've just asked me, the other thing which I found, which was really interesting, was that, we always talk about India as being a very pluralist society, as being very diverse. And the same diversity and pluralism and hybridity comes through in the cooking also, and in the way in which we think about our food. So I thought, and that actually was at the core of Indian cuisine. And so it's almost like, Naipaul wrote this book, India, A Million Mutinies, and he described the country in that way. And that's essentially what it is, even for food, that India is, the food here sort of echoes that kind of a description of a million mutinies, where you have so many different ways of doing the same thing. And each one is as delicious as the other. And it's this diversity and hybridity that was sort of fundamental to the concept of Indian cuisine. So it's very different from the way we always want to find similarities, but here it is the difference that actually makes us who we are. So I found that very interesting.
Yeah. And I think Indian cuisine is full of flavors, and with every geographic change, the way of using those ingredients changes. And in your
Yeah.
book, you beautifully talk about not only the geographic change, being in the same region, how different factors influence the use of ingredients in food. It could be region, a caste, various factors you've talked about. So my question to you is, what you think are the peculiarities of the Indian cuisine?
Yeah. So there are several interesting sort of things about Indian cuisine. The first one is that the way we think about balance. So Indian cuisine has this concept of balance, and here I say Indian cuisine, which means all the regional cuisines too. And this is something you could almost say is pan-Indian. So it's not about a dish. It's about the way we think about food and think about making the food. So, and when I talk about balance, it's about taking, say, the Ayurvedic and the Unani principles. So so Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, all the different Jains, all of them, everybody uses this notion of balance. They could have used the Ayurvedic system, or they can use the Unani system, and it's about balancing the humors in your body. So you have hot and cold, wet and dry. So these are the different ways in which you balance and each ingredient is connected with a particular thing. So some things like a mango is hot, a yogurt is cold, milk is cold. So you sort of combine mango with milk, and that's what creates a balanced dish. So that notion is there throughout, and that is different, I think, from other ways, other people's, or other geographies where they have different notions of balance. This is our notion of balance, and I would also include South Asia. So I would include Pakistan and Bangladesh and Nepal and all these the neighboring areas in this kind of a definition. The second one is about the way in which we pair flavors. So, there are two types of the way in which we pair flavors. One is positive pairing and negative pairing. I mean, negative and positive have weird connotations, but, when I say negative pairing, it means that there's each spice will perform a very unique function in the dish. So if you use tamarind, you're not going to use lemon, because both are souring agents. So in most Indian dishes, and I'm not talking about chaat. A chaat is a different thing altogether. But if you take, say, most of the dishes that you would make, you wouldn't sort of combine amchur, lemon, and tamarind all in the same dish. That's a negative pairing. Now, in positive pairing, which is what you have in the American and Western European cuisines and Latin American cuisines, what they do is they would take two souring things, so two things that taste sour, and put them together to make it even more sour. So that's a positive pairing where you intensify the flavor by taking two ingredients and putting them together in the dish to intensify it. We don't do it that way. We actually, and this goes back to this concept of balance, where each spice will have a unique function in the dish, and you can't then use other spices with similar flavors in that dish. So that's something that we do in our regional cooking, and so that's again something which is peculiar to us, and it's also to it's sort of something where even southern Mediterranean dishes also are like that, which is why I think in India, we like southern, we like pastas where they do certain types of this kind of negative pairing, but we don't like European dishes as much in India because of this positive pairing flavor profile. And yeah, so that's the other thing. And the third one is about history, which I can talk about later also, but it's about how we deal with history, where we sort of bring in, our history, the way in which we have connected with the waves of conquerors who've come in, and they have settled in, and they become part of India, and we are part of all of that. We are part of our own history, and our history combines all kinds of, different waves of sort of migrants. And what we do is we adapt and adopt, and they do the same thing. And so that's another sort of thing that is, I would say, not peculiar to India, but maybe, if you do research in other countries, maybe that's the way they've done it there too. But in India, the diversity comes from this kind of sort of attitude to history, where we both embrace and we make and the people who come in also embrace our cuisines. And I mean, when I say our, I mean we are part of that history, so we include that in ourselves and what we are now. We are the sum total of what's come before us.
Very well said, ma'am, because when you were talking, I really was able to relate. Yes, in North India, if you want to make something sour, we use lemons. And however, in South, it's always tamarind. So wherever the region changes, the food choices changes. And I'm sure in the future we'll come up with scientific reasons behind it. But there's a question in the chat box, and it is Arshia Sheikh who has asked, can you throw some light on how history has influenced Indian cuisine? as you said,
Yeah.
we have adopted the things with our history.
Yeah.
So can you tell us how they have affected us?
Yeah, so so as I said, all our cuisines, regional cuisines, rest very either heavily or lightly on layers of history, and what they and the way in which history's influenced us is that you can go all the way back to the Unani and to Ayurveda and the concept of equilibrium, which I talked about a little while ago. You also have you have the Cholas, the Persians, the Mauryas, Mughals, and the colonial legacies. They all sort of come in and bring their own bring their own ways of cooking things and their own dishes, and they have fused together. And what you find is that quite similar types of cooking techniques are found in Punjab, Uttar Pradesh, and the Deccan. And so if I give you an example, say, of the Deccan, in Hyderabad was ruled by the Nizam, and the Nizam had Turkish ancestry. So if you look at the cookbooks, the Asafia Cuisine's cookbook, it'll contain recipes of dishes like gazak, kebab akbari, pasandi kebab, kurbani meeta. Now, kurbani meeta is bread and butter pudding. And it's got this mix of Turkish, Mughal, North Indian, British, and local Deccani cuisine. So you find that, again, this is about the way in which the history sort of mingles in such interesting ways and creates such interesting dishes in the Deccan. And you'll find the same thing in other parts of India. And even with the spice use, if you think about it, one of the chapters deals with how the Mughals, when the spices came in, and if you look at the cookbooks of the Mughal emperors, the cooks of the early Mughal emperors like Babur, Humayun, and Akbar, they rarely used green or red chilies in the food. So they used so in their biryanis and pulaus, they used black pepper, salt, saffron, and lemon. And even in the kebabs and the koftas. And then when you had Jahangir ascending to the throne in 1569, we begin to see the use of ginger, black cumin, and poppy seeds. Now, Shah Jahan's kitchen used cumin, fennel, ginger, garlic paste, coriander powder, and mint. And it's only from the Shah Jahan period, you actually find green chilies entering the Mughal cuisine, and it stays in there. So you sort of see in their cookbooks and in their cooking styles, you see how they've taken what is available locally and included it and created the cuisines, which we now call Mughalai food. We also, Awadhi food, all of these different cuisines hark back to this kind of, the flavor profile.
Yeah, it's very interesting, ma'am, because I was reading that you always talked a lot about black pepper. And then I related back seeing whenever we cook anything which is for a religious purpose, it is more, it is developed before the invaders came to our country. So when Ayurveda was developed, we had the basics of our own cuisine. It's a very interesting thing to know, ma'am. Ma'am, I just want to talk on something which is very well written in your book also, that the food requirements is changing globally. And recently, the My Plate concept, which came to define healthy diet. When looking closely to the plate, we understand that it is the same plate which we had in a traditional diet. And as you have said, that the ancestors knew what is healthy. So when talking about healthy diet, what is your take on what to eat for a right diet?
Yeah, I think you are much better placed to answer this question than I am, but I can tell you, and then you should tell me after. You should tell me after I've finished whether you would agree or whether there are things that you would add on to it. So, and mine, what I say is based on the research, that people have done. So one of the things that this is also something that surprised me. I mean, your first question was what were the things that surprised me about Indian food, and this is another thing that surprised me. It's just not just about Indian food, but globally. is, the research says that our body is actually conditioned to absorb what our ancestors ate. So it's actually a cultural ancestry that actually flavors our ideal diet. So if we eat what, say, our grandparents and great grandparents and what they ate and when they ate it, that's something that would be part of what one could consider a healthy diet. And so in the South, for instance, breakfast is the largest meal and rice is the main starch. And I come from the South. And in the other three geographies, you have lunch as the main meal. And in the East, you have rice is the main starch. And West and North, you have wheat, which is chapatis. So if we think of the human body in as, say, as a whole, and we think about this notion that it's our ancestry, cultural ancestry, and what our body can absorb can only be what our ancestors ate, then so in terms of diet, I tried this experiment where I have high cholesterol, and the doctor had said that, why don't you take tablets? And I really don't like taking any medicine. So I said, look, let me try doing it through my diet. So he said, okay, try it. So then when I did this research, I said, okay, let me try eating what my grandparents ate. And so since I come from the South, we eat early. So breakfast is the largest meal. Then you have lunch, which is smaller, and dinner is a very light meal. And also I ate at about 7:30 or so in the morning, my breakfast, and about 12, I eat lunch. I still do. And about 6 o'clock in the evening, I have my dinner. And what I found was that even the stuff that I ate was all, South Indian, and there's no North Indian food in it. And I actually found that I had lost weight, but in a good way. My cholesterol levels came down from very high to borderline high, and this was after 4 months. And the other thing which was also very important along with the diet was exercise and also having low stress. And these two are really, really important along with the diet. So you can't just have a diet; you have to have these other two things too. And it was interesting because and I was wondering, as a dietitian, you must be used to a lot of people coming to you and asking you for to prescribe them a good diet. And I was wondering how you went about it. Do you see the person as an individual, which modern medicine doesn't really do? Modern medicine sees individuals as parts. So they'll take a heart, they'll take a lung, but they're not going to take the whole body, unlike in the past, right? And with the humoral theory. So I was curious whether that's the way you look at the diets. And also when there are all these modern fads about, eat only meat or have a Subway diet or don't have starch or whatever. Would you, I personally consider that a very wrong way of going about it. I actually think you have to balance and try and do it in this sort of the way in which research has shown that, you go back to to the foods that are comfortable to you. So I'm curious, what's your view, Dr. Sharma?
Yeah, definitely, ma'am. Nutrition says it's a holistic approach. As ma'am has very well said, it's not only diet, but the stress level also which you are going through affects your hormone level. Definitely. And I think with this coming of fad diet, it has become more difficult now. But what is your take now? Since I want to ask another questions, how has the pandemics affected the diet that we consume? Do you think COVID has actually affected us to change the eating pattern?
Um, so, I think with COVID, what's really interesting is that, we focus more on healthy foods now, right? Because everybody's terrified of falling ill.
Yeah.
So there was this whole move towards, let's have healthier food, let's have vegetables, let's have more things that are made locally, not much tin stuff. Then, because people were cooking and getting tired of cooking, they started ordering in. So you also have that other, the other side to it, which is that when you order in, you have this saturated fats, tin stuff. And so what's interesting is that our balance now is between healthy and then saturated. So it's like healthy, unhealthy. And that's ultimately how we are balancing at the moment. But
Love it.
yeah, and so I don't know whether this is something that will I mean, I don't know, because I think the younger generation, I mean, you probably know better in terms of because you're more exposed to all of these people who come to you, right? So I'm curious about whether the younger generation is much more health conscious, and are they more less likely to have these really sort of sugary sweets, lots of oily food, which is what the older people are used to. But
Yeah.
I'm curious whether the younger people now have moved away
Yeah,
from
it's
that.
actually, I would definitely say that the younger generation is becoming more conscious because they have seen that the elderlies are getting into diseases which were avoidable.
Hmm.
Getting into metabolic diseases, definitely who could have managed that. So now they're becoming more conscious. There is more exercise pattern which is coming up. And in between, I have another question from a viewer, and she has asked me, what sparked you to write about food biography, and what was the starting point of writing this book?
Yeah, well, I actually
Because
didn't
this is
set
an
out.
interesting topic. Like, yeah,
Yeah, but like all any topic, I think any of you would research on, you don't begin with I mean, you sort of begin with a little question, and that's how I actually began. I didn't set out to write a food biography of India at all. So I started writing these as little essays, for this magazine called Open Magazine. And I'm an academic by training, political scientist, but I wanted to write about something that was quite different from my everyday job, but at the same time, it would be informed by the way I had been trained and by the questions that are very important to me. So the questions that are very important to me are about identity, sort of freedom, justice, equality. These are concepts. But what was most important was actually this identity question: is, who are we? What are we? How are we what we are? And I thought, let me, and food sort of became a very interesting way of sort of examining these questions, because if you think about, say, any religion, you have these notions of purity and pollution connected to food. So who you eat with, what you eat, whether you're vegetarian, non-vegetarian, whether you can, combine certain sort of, yogurt with fish, or you can't combine yogurt with fish. There are different sort of religious things that are there, and they're all connected with food. So it was very interesting to sort of think about identity in connection with food. So that's how, I mean, and so I came up with questions like, why do North Indians and South Indians have very different styles of cooking? What explains it? And then I'd go off and it sort of looks into archaeology, anthropology, questions of, is there an Indo-Aryan invasion? And because in South India, uh, there's this whole myth about Aryans sort of coming down to South India, but then the cooking techniques didn't translate there. And then now it turns out there were no Aryans after all. And we've been sort of this hybrid nation, and, it's all indigenous right from, way back, right? This whole book sort of came about only because after I started writing these, at the age, Meeta Kapoor, who runs Siyahi, a literary agency, she called me up and she said, would you be interested in writing about food? I said, sure. And then she found this publisher, Speaking Tiger, Ravi Singh, who runs it. So Ravi Singh and I had a chat, and Ravi Singh said, yeah, I mean, a food biography would be great. So I said, yeah, but of India. But I said, but I only want to talk about myself. I don't want to talk about India because I really don't know, I don't know how I can bring India in. And then that's how it began. And he was like, I don't think people are going to be very interested in you. He was very polite, but so then I began to think about, India, and then I realized that it's actually a mosaic, and you can't really talk about India as as like one entity. It's this mosaic of things. And so I started examining the mosaics. So yeah, very long answer to a short question. Sorry.
but then the thing is that your book is written in such a style that it always poses a question to us, to which you always give an answer. So my question is that how the food has been used to invoke nationalism.
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. And that's also and what's really interesting about it is that we go back to these old tropes, So I didn't realize, for instance, that, the Brahma Samaj in the early 19th century, and then later on in Arya Samaj in the late 19th century, the nationalists were using food motifs. So in the early 19th century, you had the Brahma Samajis who actually were against the caste system. So they said, those who joined the Brahma Samaj, especially the young Bengali youths, they wanted to have bread and lemonade. Now, bread and lemonade were made by Muslims and lower castes. So the high castes wouldn't touch it. And so it was taboo. But when you joined the Brahma Samaj, you were given permission to have bread and lemonade. So, you have these diaries of these really, these freedom fighters who said, of course I joined. The minute they said I could have bread and lemonade, I was there, I was going to join the Brahma Samaj. So so there you had, it was against the caste system where they wanted the Hindus to become become more modern and less casteist. By the late 19th century, you had the Arya Samajis who wanted to create a Hindu who was not a subject anymore, who would actually oppose the British and the Muslims, because they wanted to combine. They wanted to bring. They used food to sort of create this Hindu identity among the Hindus. And so they used this cow protection societies. They said, don't eat beef. So for instance, you have Vivekananda, who said, you must eat meat, because he was very influenced by some of the Western philosophies where there was this whole notion that, meat eating made people strong and sort of very aggressive, and a meat eating Indian would not be a subject and docile anymore. But he said, don't eat beef. And so the same beef. And then now you come all the way down to the more recent period where you have these brigades going about saying, protect the cow, don't eat beef. And they want to create a Hindu vote bank, right? So, and they go back to the same motives that the late 19th century had. So, and they want to create a different kind of nationalism, because now we don't have any, we don't have the British ruling. We rule ourselves. So why create these motives? But here, the way it's being done is to create a vote bank. So, so nationalism, so it was used to create a particular form of identity, and food was a very powerful motive. I mean, if you remember 1857, again, it was about the use of pig fat on the rifle, sort of the thing where they had to actually bite it, and somebody said it's pig fat, and that rumor went around, and and then the other way that they passed messages in 1857 was through chapatis, where they would put the messages within and bake it in chapatis, and that's how they spread the secret messages. So.
Actually, food has a history, and a history has the food.
Yes.
It's actually interrelated. It's always been working the same. So just on a lighter side, Shylashri, do you use this craft of writing a novel to win cooking competitions as well?
Yeah, so if any of you want to, I'm a great fan of MasterChef Australia, not any of the other MasterChefs, but the original. And so, so if you look at, when you write a novel, and, what is it that makes a good story, right? So think about the Cinderella story. So you have somebody who's a victim, who's not, so who have these evil stepsisters and stepmother. Then she has a fairy godmother who comes in. Then she goes to this ball. She meets this wonderful prince. But then the prince doesn't know who she is. So, and then she goes back to her old life. And then the prince is looking for her, and she's still a victim at that point. And then, at the end, so she has a setback, and then she, and at the end, the prince finds her, right? So if you've applied this kind of schematic to a MasterChef cooking program, so I've come up with a few rules. One is that don't peak early. So you have to be a slightly low profile initially, where you sort of plod along and do your thing. But then you begin to show your, techniques, but don't show it too much. Start failing. So get on to every one of those elimination, as many of those as you can find, because the more elimination challenges you're in, the more visibility you're going to get, right? And in those programs, they want people who can talk well, but who can also cry. So cry quite a bit while you're doing all of this. And then keep failing, but always don't fail so badly that you're going to be thrown out of the program. Fail enough to get into the elimination once. And then you slowly build up your success after success. And then you see that trajectory. And then you can have one last, when the prince doesn't find Cinderella and she goes back, you can have that one last hiccup where you say, okay, you do something really, really badly, and you're really in the dumps, but somehow you fight back. And this is all during that 1 hour show where you somehow fight back and your cake rises and whatever else happens. And then at the end, you have the grand finale where you have succeeded against all odds. So
I think this is a great mantra shared by you, ma'am, and one should actually try this. And while listening, also, I was like, yeah, this is great. One should do that. But one more thing I want to know that as we always say that food is affected by the religion, the caste, the food preferences of a people. Do you think media also, the social media is affecting what the young foodies are becoming now?
Yeah, so what's happened, which is wonderful about social media, is that it has democratized food and fine dining, particularly. Not food, fine dining. So, earlier fine dining was always amongst the very wealthy, right? I mean, people didn't go to 5-star hotels, etc. But now what you find is that you don't have to go to a 5-star hotel. You can still get fine dining in these smaller places which focus on a particular kind of cuisine, but they do it in an exquisite way, and it's affordable enough for people to go out there and then they come back and then they post it on their Zomato and or whatever social media, Facebook, Instagram, and it's wonderful because you no longer have only food critics saying these things, right? You have everybody is a food critic, and everybody gets a chance to say what they want to say and express their opinion, and it's wonderful. I mean, I think social media has really, I think, in that sense, democratized the entire concept of a connoisseurship, of taste. It's also, what it's done is that you have all of these older and younger people, everybody sharing their grandmothers and great grandparents' recipes in order to talk about, say, this is absolutely the dish that I had when I was a child, and this is how you make it. And earlier it was always with the grandmothers and nobody else knew the recipe, but now it's all out there. And you actually have grandmothers cooking. I mean, I was watching this wonderful program where you have this lovely sort of, she doesn't have any teeth, but she's like this wonderful grandmother in Punjab with this huge vat where she's making these chana and all of these different things. And it's called Village Granny, or I've forgotten the name of that website, but there are lots of those kinds of shows, and it's wonderful because you watch that, you can actually go and replicate it. So again, the secrecy has gone and you have more access to more delicious food that people grew up eating in their grandmothers' houses, right? So social media has really, I think, in that sense, revolutionized the way the accessibility of recipes, of fine dining, of a variety, opened up a variety of tastes. So not just Indian, it's from all over the world. It's very global.
Actually, social media actually made us global, from the traditional recipes to the new and even the fusion recipes.
Exactly.
And even in your book, ma'am, you have shared some wonderful traditional recipes, also some latest recipes which can be transformed easily at home. Do you ever think of writing a recipe book?
Not at all. I have no authority to write a recipe book because if you ask my husband, he says I only talk about food. I never seem to cook it. So, and I said, yeah, I love eating food. I don't really, I mean, I like cooking, but my style is not, I'm not, I'm not somebody who would actually write a recipe book. I'd like to taste, so I'm sure, I mean, I'd love to be invited to taste anybody else's recipes.
Yeah, to all my viewers, in ma'am's book, there are various recipes, traditional and some new fusion recipes. You should check out those recipes. And I think it's great talking to you, ma'am.
It's
What is the
wonderful.
next endeavor, ma'am? After this, what are you planning to write next?
So, well, I'm thinking about gardening actually and nature. So that's something that I want to connect with because I love gardening, and so that's another area that and I want to write about it in a slightly different way. And that's also, I think, something where a lot of younger people, and especially with the pandemic, I think a lot of people have started looking at the greenery and, thinking about, in Delhi, our lungs are all totally gone, right, because of all of this pollution. And there's this move towards greening the places where you live. And, so there seems to be that kind of movement. So, yeah.
And there's a question in the chat box, and it's a Prakash who has asked how long it took you to write this book, and it calls for a lot of research also.
Yeah, but I'm a total nerd, a total researcher at heart. I love research. To me, it was like a labor of love, but it was just wonderful. And it took me about 4 years, I think, 3 or 4 years to write it. And and I wrote it, but because I didn't sit down and for 3 years I didn't do research and then write it. I didn't do it that way. I was writing these series of essays in open. So I was doing research for that. And then what I did was I went and deepened some of that research and then brought it into the book. So, yeah. So for those of you who want to write, by the way, just a tip is don't think of it as the book. Think of it as questions and begin with a small question and go from there. Because you write your introduction always at the end after you've come to the conclusion. Remember that. So after you've written the whole thing, you go back and you write your introduction. Because by then you figure out what exactly is it that you've written about.
Yes.
So
definitely, because you introduce your own book in the introduction. So write the complete book, and then you should have a
and
good
then you go back and exactly.
Yeah. So, ma'am, I think my last question for the session would be, with all this research, has it changed your pattern of diet? Has it influenced you?
Yes, and I'm not sure whether it's because of all of this research. Some of it is because of the research, because the things that I found about cultural ancestry and what suits my body and these sorts of things I have found through the research, right? So I eat in a particular way, I eat in a particular rhythm. These things I do now, which has changed. But I've also changed my food habits towards more simplicity, which wasn't there earlier. So earlier I would like really I love Awadhi food, I love Deccani food, lots of mirchi, spices, or butter and all that. But now I find my body can't take so much of it anymore. So I like simpler combinations. So my lifestyle's become much more simple, and maybe it's because I've become older, or I'm not quite sure. The body changes also, I think so.
So, ma'am, what would be your takeaway message for the audience? What your diet should be?
Yeah, so I would say just, I think all of you should experiment with eating what your nana, nani, dada, dadi ate. Okay, so try that as an experiment. Connect it. Plus, I said exercise plus low stress. And when I say low stress, stop looking at your emails and computers for some time. Take at least half a day off and just don't look at it. Because I think this technology really increases the stress. So if you can do diet, stress, low stress, and exercise, and decent exercise, not high exercise, walk for 20 minutes a day, that's more than enough. Something like, I'm sure you have better solutions, Dr. Sharma, but just do a few of these things, I think would be, yeah. Would you agree?
Going back to the roots is definitely true, ma'am, because what our actually Dada Dadi ate, and although it was more nutritious and maybe more organic also, we are moving more towards the pesticides and artificially created foods. It is also affecting
Yeah.
our ecosystem now. So
Yeah.
it was wonderful talking to you, ma'am. And
Same here.
I now hand over the session to Amey sir. Amey sir, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sharma. It was so enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Before moving ahead, I would like to take a moment and acknowledge the support of Speaking Tiger publication, as their association is invaluable to OCLF. At the outset, I would like to thank Mr. Shylashri Shankar ma'am and Dr. Invaluable ma'am for joining us today. We look forward to hearing both of you again and to be as enlightened as we are today. And for my dear massive audience, I am sure that after witnessing this conversation, you all are taking home an enriched version of yourselves, just as I will. Thank you for joining with us today. Until I see you again, this is Amey Jamne signing off.
Thank you, Amey. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Amey.
Welcome to Raisoni Group, a vision beyond.